Laura was working like any other night, or at least that's how it seemed. The hall shimmered, glasses clinked softly, and the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan followed its ritual of silent luxury. Still, something felt wrong. An invisible weight in the air. A premonition difficult to explain. Laura couldn't say why, she just felt that this night wouldn't end like the others. What she could never have imagined was that, a few hours later, among those same elegant tables, she would live through the most humiliating scene of her life, a scene that would not only mark her memory, but would be broadcast in real time to thousands of people on social media, before an audience she never chose to face. Minutes earlier, Laura adjusted her apron carefully behind the counter. It was only her first week at Monte Verita, and every movement still demanded extra attention. A gastronomy student, she had accepted the internship at the invitation of the owner, who believed that understanding the dining room was just as important as mastering the kitchen. That night, Laura would learn that lesson in a way she would never forget. The restaurant doors opened. The sharp sound of footsteps cut through the discreet conversations. Daniel Cross, a billionaire CEO known both for the empire he commanded and for the pleasure he took in intimidating people, entered accompanied by two executives. The confident smile. The assessing gaze. The posture of someone who needed to dominate every space he occupied. The atmosphere changed. Some employees exchanged quick glances. Laura took a deep breath. That table was now hers. The waitress crossed the hall with measured steps, feeling her heart race as she approached the newly occupied table. 3 men. 2 of them observed the environment with controlled curiosity, typical executives accustomed to exclusive settings. The third, at the center, did not observe, he evaluated. Like someone measuring the value of everything around him. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Laura. I'll be taking care of your table tonight, she said, her voice steady enough not to betray her nervousness. Daniel Cross didn't respond right away. He adjusted the napkin on his lap with calculated slowness, took a sip of water, and only then lifted his eyes to her. His gaze carried neither curiosity nor kindness. It was clinical. Cold. As if he were deciding something. Laura, he repeated, as if testing the name. Interesting. The 2 executives smiled faintly. Daniel continued. You're new here, aren't you? Her stomach tightened. There was no denying it. Yes, sir. I'm on a training period. I can tell. He replied, leaning slightly forward. Just make sure tonight goes smoothly. We don't have time for learning curves. Laura nodded, swallowing hard. She presented the wine list, carefully describing the options. When she pronounced the name of a more complex French label, Daniel raised his hand, interrupting her mid-sentence. Say that again. Slower. She repeated it. HM. That's not how it's usually pronounced, he said, with a half-smile. Or at least, not by professionals. The executives laughed softly. Not too loudly. Just enough to show alignment. Laura felt her face warm, but she maintained her posture. I apologize. Would you like me to recommend another option? Daniel exchanged a quick glance with his companions, as if amused by his own authority. Let's try the Bordeaux. But please, he made a vague gesture with his hand, don't rush it. Minutes later, when Laura returned with the bottle, her hands were steady, or at least that's what she kept telling herself. She served the executives first, following protocol. As she tilted the bottle toward the glass of the arrogant CEO Daniel, a drop of water slid down the chilled glass and fell onto the white tablecloth. It was almost imperceptible, but Daniel saw it. Seriously? He said, far too loudly to be casual. Conversations at nearby tables dropped in volume. A drop of water, in a place like this? He shook his head, as if deeply disappointed. Is this how they train people now? I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean it right away. Laura replied, already extending the napkin. No, leave it. He interrupted her. I want to see how this unfolds. The executives exchanged uncomfortable smiles. Daniel was putting on a show. Laura felt it clearly now. He didn't just want to point out a mistake. He wanted an audience. She collected the bottle, took a deep breath, and moved toward the kitchen to fetch the main course. As she walked, her hands trembled slightly. Not from incompetence, but from pressure. She knew. She knew that when she returned to that table, something would happen. And Daniel Cross knew it too. If you also feel outraged by situations like this, of unfair humiliation, subscribe to the channel to strengthen our community. Laura returned to the hall a few minutes later, trying to steady her breath before approaching the table once again. The hum of the restaurant had resumed, but something felt different. More contained. More aware. As if the entire room knew that this table demanded careful attention. Daniel Cross was conversing animatedly with the two executives, gesturing with exaggerated confidence. He spoke of business, numbers, acquisitions. Each sentence was a calculated display of power. When Laura approached, he interrupted his own speech without looking at her. Finally, he said, checking the watch on his wrist. We were starting to wonder if the kitchen shut down. Laura ignored the comment and began her service, placing the silverware correctly, aligning the empty plates with precision. Each movement was slow, studied. She knew any detail would be watched closely. You're very quiet now, Daniel remarked, leaning back in his chair. Nervous? Just focused on doing my job, sir. She replied, keeping her eyes down. Focused? He laughed, short and dry. That's interesting. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like uncertainty. The executive smiled, but this time, there was something different in their laughter. One of them quickly looked away. The other adjusted his tie, uncomfortable. Laura excused herself to fetch the main course. In the kitchen, she placed her hands on the counter for a few seconds. She wasn't messing up. She knew that. The problem wasn't technical. It was personal. Daniel Cross needed to feel superior, and she had become the perfect instrument for that. When she returned to the hall, she carried the plate with extreme care. Handmade pasta, rich red sauce, finished exactly as the chef had instructed. It was a flawless dish. She approached the table. This is the house specialty you ordered. Handmade pasta, slow-cooked tomato. Stop. Daniel interrupted, raising his hand. Laura froze. He analyzed the plate without touching it, tilting his head as if searching for an invisible flaw. That's not what I asked for. Her heart raced. Sir, this is the dish described on the menu. It follows the. Are you arguing with me now? He cut her off, his voice louder. The surrounding tables went silent once again. I'm just explaining, sir. Laura said, feeling her throat tighten. Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. You see? He said to the executives. This is exactly what I mean. People like her don't know when to stop talking. He finally touched the plate, pulling it slightly forward. Do you even understand what you're serving? Or are you just repeating words you memorized? Laura opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't. Not because she didn't know, but because she understood something essential in that moment. Nothing she said would be enough. Daniel felt the gaze of the room on him. He felt the phones being subtly lifted. And instead of stepping back, he pressed forward. I'm trying to impress important people tonight, he said, now with coldness. And you're making that very difficult. His hand gripped the edge of the plate. The red sauce trembled slightly. Laura noticed. And she knew, with painful clarity, that his next move wouldn't just be a word. And it was at that moment that the billionaire, used to dominating entire rooms, decided he needed to go further. For a brief instant, no one breathed. Daniel Cross still held the plate in front of him, his fingers pressing into the white porcelain with enough force to betray what was about to happen. The red sauce trembled on the surface of the pasta, thick, glossy under the golden lights of the hall. Laura remained motionless in front of the table, her hands clasped before her body, her gaze attentive, not submissive, but contained. "This is wrong," he said slowly. "Completely wrong. Sir, I assure you this is exactly how the dish is prepared. It's a... Don't!" Daniel cut her off, now with a voice heavy with irritation. "Don't explain things you don't understand." The two executives exchanged glances. One of them opened his mouth, as if about to say something, but gave up. The other picked up his phone, deliberately placing it on the table, the camera discreetly pointed forward. Daniel noticed. And smiled. It was the smile of someone who feels watched and enjoys it. "You know what the problem is?" he continued, raising his tone slightly. "Places like this start giving opportunities to people who aren't ready. And then they expect excellence." He lifted the plate. First, the sauce began to slowly spill over the edge. A red line slid down, dripping through the air before touching the light fabric of Laura's shirt. The contrast was immediate. Brutal. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Before anyone could react, Daniel tilted the plate completely. The pasta fell onto the waitress's chest, hot, heavy, spreading across her light blouse. The red sauce splashed and spread, running down over the buttons, staining the fabric, dripping onto the polished floor of the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. The sound of porcelain hitting the table echoed far too loudly. Laura didn't react. She simply closed her eyes for a single second, as the sauce slowly ran, hot, marking every centimeter of the humiliation she had just suffered. The hall plunged into absolute silence. "That's what happens when people like you try to handle things above their level," Daniel declared, satisfied, leaning back in his chair. Laura opened her eyes. Her gaze held no tears. No uncontrolled anger. It was something deeper. Something that made even the executives at the table avoid looking at her directly. She took a deep breath. The sauce was still dripping. And then, something changed. Phones began to vibrate almost at the same time. Notifications. Shares. Messages being sent before the plate had even cooled on the floor. The video was already circulating. Daniel was still smiling, unaware that, at that exact moment, he was no longer the one controlling the narrative. Laura remained standing, motionless and dignified. And as the red sauce marked her clothes like a visible scar, the entire city began to watch the moment a billionaire crossed a line he could never erase. If you also found the CEO's attitude outrageous, type revenge in the comments. After the most absurd scene Monty Verita had ever witnessed, everyone stood in silence, until the manager appeared almost running from the back of the hall, his phone clutched in his hand as if it were on fire. His face was pale. His eyes too wide to hide the panic. "Sir," he began, looking at Daniel, then at Laura, then at the raised phones around them. This is already online." Daniel frowned, irritated. "What are you talking about?" The manager turned the phone screen toward him. The video was right there. Short. Cruel. Undeniable. The exact moment the plate was lifted. The sauce spilling. The pasta falling. The silence. Laura's motionless face. And the comments appearing in real time. Daniel felt his stomach drop. "This will be taken down," he said, trying to maintain control. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," the manager replied, his voice firm for the first time that night. And so does everyone else now. One of the executives slowly stood up. Daniel, he said quietly. I think we should go. Sit down. Daniel snapped. This is a misunderstanding. But no one sat. The other executive was already putting his phone away, avoiding eye contact. That wasn't power. He murmured. That was a mistake. The manager's phone vibrated again. He read the message and swallowed hard. Sir, the owner is on the line. Daniel lifted his chin. Put him through. The call was placed on speaker. The voice on the other end wasn't loud, nor aggressive. It was far too calm to be ignored. Daniel. The man said. This is Jonathan. The name crossed the hall like an invisible weight. Daniel knew that name. Jonathan Whitmore wasn't just the owner of the restaurant. He was one of the most respected men in the industry. Someone who didn't need to raise his voice to close doors. I've just watched the video. Jonathan continued. Every second of it. Silence. The young woman you humiliated, her name is Laura. Daniel looked at her for the first time since it happened. She's not just a trainee. The voice went on. She's a gastronomy student. And she's here because I invited her. Because her family is dear to me. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. Tonight, you didn't embarrass my restaurant. Jonathan continued. You embarrassed yourself. The call ended, and Daniel stood frozen, as if the ground had lost its firmness. Around him, phones kept recording. Laura took a deep breath. Carefully, she picked up a clean napkin from the sideboard and pressed it against her stained blouse. Then she lifted her gaze not just toward Daniel, but toward everyone. I didn't come here to be seen, she said, her voice firm, without trembling. I came here to learn. The entire hall remained silent. I thought understanding this place meant understanding service. Pressure. Respect. Her voice did not shake. I didn't know I would have to learn what happens when someone confuses cruelty with authority. Daniel didn't respond. There were no more applauses for him. No laughter. No audience. Only witnesses. Before Laura could take her first step toward the back of the hall, a chair moved at the central table. One of the men who had watched everything in silence stood up. This dinner is over. And so is your contract. The sentence fell like a blade. He was more than just a guest. He was the main investor. And everyone there knew it. Effective immediately. He added, without raising his voice. Daniel tried to speak. He couldn't. The power he had displayed minutes earlier found nowhere to stand. Laura walked toward the doors with the same posture with which she had served the wine hours before, dignified, intact. And as she disappeared into the restrained murmur of the hall, a truth spread through the city as fast as the video. Power that needs humiliation is already collapsing. If this story made you feel something, subscribe now. Because respect is always worth defending.